Hello there. Welcome to Project Justice. I am Mutaba Moran. Our focus this week is still on the anti-corruption war. The Nigerian media landscape has in recent weeks been awash with reports of cash discoveries allegedly looted by public officials. The discoveries, though, has not been without drama and some inconsistencies. Critics have described the actions of the anti-graft agencies as more of publicity stunt than substance. But for others, it is indicative that the Buhari administration's anti-corruption war is indeed gaining a lot of traction. Well, Project Justice this week continues its focus on the strategy. Daniel Bwala is a member of Lincoln's Inn, London, and a keen follower of Nigeria's anti-graft war. He is my guest this week. Please meet him after this news break.
Welcome back from the Easter break. Before the holiday, the judiciary handled a number of controversial issues. The revelation by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC) that it has uncovered large sums of money in strange places, including residential buildings in Lagos and elsewhere, shocked many Nigerians. Investigations are still ongoing and no name has yet been mentioned by the anti-graft agency as owners of the loot. In the circumstances, the judiciary would have to wait until investigations are concluded and these cases are properly brought before it. The Edo State Governorship Election Petitions Tribunal in Benin City reaffirmed the election of Godwin Obaseki of the All Progressive Congress (APC) as duly elected in the September 28, 2016 governorship election in the state. In a 2.5 unanimous judgment delivered by the three-man panel of justices, headed by Justice Ahmed Badamasi, the tribunal dismissed the appeal of the PDP and its candidates for its inability to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. Iyamu wants the tribunal to declare him winner of the 2016 governorship election, that it was met with irregularities. Federal High Court in Abuja also ordered the Department of State Security Services to produce former Benue State Governor Gabriel Suswan and two others in court for him to answer criminal charges preferred against him by the government. The trio were alleged to have diverted the sum of over 9 billion naira, which was meant for police reform program, subsidy reinvestment and empowerment program between 2012 and 2015, while Suswan was the governor of the state. Suswan was not present in court because the DSS did not bring him to court, but the prosecution counsel Aminu Alilu confirmed to Justice Gabriel Kolawole that a letter was communicated to the DSS and they acknowledged it. But Justice Kolawole ordered the DSS to produce Suswan in court on the next adjourned date, May 11th, for him to take his plea. The Nigerian Army has been dragged before a Plateau State High Court by a mining firm, Nippon Integrated Business Concept, over the continuous harassment on its workers in Wase local government of the state. According to the council representing the workers, Ahmed Gaba alleged that the army on many occasions stopped the mining activities over the payment of royalties. Gaba also alleged that complaints has been lodged at the state's Ministry of Mines and Steel Development, but to no avail. They want the court to explain whether payment of royalties to the Nigerian Army after payment has been made to the government is lawful.
And now to our featured interview, the war against corruption. Is the government getting the plot right? Thank you very much, Daniel Bwala, for accepting to speak with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for coming.
We're talking corruption. Is the anti-corruption war failing, in your opinion?
I wouldn't say it has failed or is failing, but I would say it is suffering a massive setback, especially because in the last few days we have not seen the result as expected from the anti-corruption war. No conviction has been secured at the moment, and even matters for which we consider as technical and straightforward, the EFCC has suffered in the court. So to that extent, we wouldn't say it is successful, even though it has not completely failed, because we have seen recoveries also of finances from across the nation.
At what point should one be thinking of getting it right? Because emphasis has always been laid on proper investigation. Why has it been so difficult to get it right at that level?
I think in Nigeria, my opinion is that the EFCC as an institution of government has been seriously involved in both investigation and prosecution to an extent. That is making it difficult for them to achieve success. If you look at jurisdiction like the United Kingdom, you have a different institution or different body that handles investigation. And then the cases are turned over to crown prosecutors and they only concentrate on prosecution. The problem we have in Nigeria is, number one, most of the cases are dragged to court before investigation are thorough. And the success of a corruption war or a criminal case lies on prosecution. You can tell, and lies from investigation, you can tell from your investigation whether you're going to succeed in court or not, because our system of law, criminal justice, is that every element constituting the offense for which you charge the accused must be proved beyond reasonable doubt. And you cannot secure conviction on the basis of that if you do not have a proper investigation in each of the cases. Take, for example, the case of Honorable Justice Ademola. It was quashed at the level of no case submission. This is strange. Ordinarily, the case ought to have gone into trial. But the reason is because the law is clear where the testimony of the prosecution is so manifestly unreliable that no tribunal will be able, on the basis of that, to reach that conclusion. Then it will not be necessary in the circumstance to go into proper trial. Even though the law is also clear that at the stage in which the prosecution open and close its case, the most important thing that the tribunal or the judge will look at is whether there is, in actual fact, an evidence that suggests an establishment of allegation for which the accused will be expected to put up a defense. It is not to determine whether the accused at that stage is not guilty. And so one would have expected that naturally this case would have gone into trial. In other words, that the no case submission will not have succeeded. But we can see that they couldn't succeed because of improper investigation. The testimonies were flawed in the court of law.
Is it a problem of being in too much of a haste, or is it a problem of not having the requisite resources, the technical know-how to carry out these thorough investigations?
I think the first one, being too much in a haste, and that's why some people alluded to political inclination in anti-corruption war. In England, it can take them 5-10 years investigating somebody. By the time they go into court, they have gathered enough evidence for the matter. Arguably, in Nigerian case, take for example the case of James Ibori. EFCC did their investigation. The courts in Nigeria acquitted him. But in England, he was convicted on the same offenses. But the difference is that the same report, investigative report of EFCC in Nigeria, was used in England. The difference is that there was enough time given for proper investigation. So some of the cases suffer in court because as soon as the accused person is arrested to when he is charged to court, thorough investigation has not been done. And if you rush into court with that, you will suffer. It is better to wait, however long it takes, get it right, go to court, and then you can secure conviction. There is the other side of it that I have suggested right from when the administration came on board, that we have to be able to define at the beginning whether the financial recovery looks at the recoveries of the money or the retribution that we're seeking, which is to send them to prison. If we're looking at recovery for the purposes of economic development, I suggested earlier that it is very, very important for us to look at plea bargain as a strategy. No country of the world is more interested in fighting corruption like America. But 80% of American criminal cases have ended in what? In plea bargain. And they're able to get money. Massive company. So if we have adopted the plea bargain strategy in most of the recent cases we find in court, we would have had much more money than we would have had. And plea bargain does not mean the person goes free. He's still convicted for lesser offenses.
But even to go into plea bargain, you have to have enough investigation on ground to connect the person to the crime. So it still goes back to investigation.
It goes back to investigation. But if you look at the accused person in Nigerian, factor in Nigerian community, some of them do not even have to wait until you go into the details of investigation for them to ask for plea bargain. From the information we're hearing and we're reading, it seems that quite a number of them have suggested at the beginning that they would like to explore plea bargain. And plea bargain is acknowledged by our law. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act has also adopted plea bargain, and the procedure is just simple. So the state should explore plea bargain. On the strength of the charges in court already, If the government, if the EFCC had attempted plea bargain, it is my opinion that we would have by now had considerable response, positive response from the side of the accused persons.
How much is a tough war, which we've heard a lot of people talk about, that the tough war between the EFCC and some other investigating agencies affecting proper investigation as well?
Very good one. And as a matter of fact, the perspective I have is that, and it's part of the reasons why anti-corruption war is not succeeding in the way in which we expect it. Now, almost every law enforcement agency of the government is involved in financial recovery. Strangely, even DSS is involved in financial recovery. It's not within the ambit of their law. ICPC is there, Code of Conduct, police, and everybody is involved in this. And so it is difficult. Let's take, for example, when the judges' residence were, invaded by the DSS, assuming that this information was submitted to EFCC to do further investigation. By that collaboration, we'll be able to get a very much success in that anti-corruption war. But as soon as they got it, they rush into court. Now, if an agency, for example, which has not defined its role, goes into anti-corruption war, is that agency not likely to suffer? And by extension, the government suffering. So, and then you have the interagency conflict too, where an agency believes, based on the extant law, that it is that agency that is tasked with the responsibility of, like the recent misunderstanding between EFCC and DSS with the judge's case in point. The EFCC said it was not within the ambit of DSS. It was within the purview of EFCC. If you have this kind of disagreement, there is likely to be a distortion in collaboration for the purposes of proper prosecution, in the events that investigation is bringing out evidence that can be used against the accused person. So interagency conflict is part of the problem.
So can it really accurately be said that political interests are inadvertently undermining the war against corruption?
I believe it. But you see, this is why the office of the Attorney General should be up and doing, in my opinion. The office of the Attorney General of the Federation is the chief law officer. The Attorney General is the chief law officer of the country. And if you look at EFCC, it's under, to a large extent, the influence and control of the Office of the Attorney General and all other law enforcement agencies. So Attorney General, the Office of the Attorney General should be able to come out with a blueprint, a clear-cut blueprint that defines the role of each of the agencies. For example, an agency whose task it is to collate information, investigate and bring out facts. The agency that can go as far as inviting these individuals for questioning in order to get more information. And then the agency or individuals that will take the matter to court. But when one is doing the case of 3 and the other one is doing the case of 3, you are likely going to find that kind of problem.
Are we having a case of too many cooks spoiling the broth? Because you also have the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, and you have the EFCC that is, a lot of people perceive would be more likely to listen to that committee because it was appointed by the president. The president seemed to have a lot of faith in the people he appointed to serve in that committee with clear-cut mandates. And you also have the Attorney General on the one side. You have the DSS on the one side. Are we having too many in the mix that at the end of it, we may be losing what we actually intend to be gaining?
Right. That boils down to the issue of coordination. There's no proper... You see, you can work with all of them. They can all collaborate if there is a proper coordination. But the question I've even asked, especially in recent time where the Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption was seen to be more vocal and vociferous than established institutions that should be seen to be doing that. For example, the recent problem with the Senate, you see the chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee more vocal. You see the decision regarding the confirmation and non-confirmation of Magu. Presidential Advisory Committee chair is more vocal than even the Office of the Attorney General. You see the issue of prosecution of criminal cases. The Presidential Advisory Committee, in my opinion, is a committee that exists at the pleasure of the president to review and then recommend to the president the best practices, best approach that the government will take in the anti-corruption war. The question I've asked, even though the Presidential Advisory Committee reports to the president, is it they report to the president through the Office of the Attorney General? If yes, then their function should be merely advisory. Let the Office of the Attorney General be the poster child, the vocal cavity of the government. But if all of them are talking, you are likely going to say, you see, where you have a contradiction, you are saying A, I'm saying B, and all of us are targeting at C, we're likely not going to get resolved, because whatever you say, whatever I say, whatever I tender, whatever you tender, might be an evidence that we are likely going to rely on in court consequently. So I feel that there is no proper coordination in the anti-corruption war. The advisory committee is doing its own. Sometimes, in my opinion, I feel they go outside of the bounds of their office. The office of the Attorney General is not doing enough. It's working, but not doing enough to coordinate all these agencies of the government. I'll give you an example. When Magu's name was submitted for confirmation, and the DSS wrote a damning report against him, expectedly, the office of the Attorney General ought to have coordinated that. Call the DSS office, call the Attorney General and the EFCC office, reconcile the matter, sit over the letter that will be written by the DSS, because the DSS will be required to write a letter, and ensure that this letter is vetted by the office of the Attorney General. Then it can be forwarded to the National Assembly. But everybody is working at pass. So we have found a situation where the chairman has not yet been confirmed, and that is creating a lot of problem in EFCC altogether, because where the head is not stable, the entire body is likely not to be stable.
Okay, we'll be talking about prosecution shortly, but let's take a short break. We'll be back with Barrister Daniel Bwala. Stay with us. Human rights, equality, fairness, the rule of law, principles that shape a democratic society. Who sets the moral bar? Who controls the wheel of justice? Who protects the weak and the strong? Who defines the legal framework and ensures its just enforcement? Citizens' constitutional rights, liberties and basic freedoms. AIT's Legal and Human Rights Program, Project Justice, returns. Project Justice, 5:30, every Wednesday on Africa Independent Television. It's Project Justice. My guest is Daniel Bwala. Let's talk about prosecutions.
Right.
What role does it play in the entire success or perceived failure of the anti-corruption drive?
Right. The prosecution, it is the duty of the prosecution to secure conviction in a criminal trial. However, there is even a greater burden on the prosecution to see that justice is attained in every criminal trial. In other words, even though the prosecution is armed with the target of securing conviction in a criminal trial, however, the burden to dispense justice must override that personal feeling or that initial assignment of securing conviction. Why do I say that? In advanced countries, you find a situation where, in fact, even in our law, it is accepted where the prosecution, if you have exculpatory evidence, that means you have an evidence that is going to help the accused person. But because of the special privilege of the prosecution in securing or getting that evidence, to which the accused person does not have, the law requires that the prosecution should turn over that evidence to the accused. In the Nigerian setting, and from the Nigerian perspective of criminal trial, we don't see that being done. The police are not interested. The prosecution is not interested in turning over exculpatory evidence to the accused. So the mentality of the Nigerian prosecutor, with the greatest respect to all of them, is to see the conviction of the accused by hook or crook. Now, anytime you set out to do that, you are not likely going to succeed in that. And there is even another expectation of that prosecutor, because the rules of professional conduct also expect that the prosecutor should be fair in his dealings, including turning over exculpatory evidence. In Nigeria, and with the anti-corruption war, we have found out that most of the cases that suffer, EFCC cases that suffer in court, are in most cases, cases that suffer as a result of not just improper investigation, but the manner in which the witnesses for the prosecution are laid in court is also a problem. Look at, for example, whether you're looking at the Code of Conduct trial or you're looking at the written trial of Justice Ademola, with all the witnesses coming to give evidence. Most of their testimonies were merely speculative. You cannot prosecute a case successfully with speculative evidence. Even where circumstantial evidence is drawn in a criminal trial, it is when overwhelming evidence suggests that the court can circumstantially look at the facts of the case. But you cannot succeed by bringing speculative information. And so the prosecution has to be sure that when you tender your evidence, either by way of testimony, it is not speculative.
The use of external lawyers by the EFCC and other prosecuting agencies to prosecute corruption war, is it the best in the interest of justice and ensuring that conviction is achieved?
I think it's the best. The reason is because those who investigate should be different from those who prosecute. However, because if you are investigating and prosecuting, you are going to be biased in the prosecution, because having investigated, you will want to see that every evidence you found out is tendered and admitted in court. So I agree that those who prosecute should be different, the use of external lawyers. I think the problem EFCC and all other law enforcement agents of the government are having is either because, I am not saying that to denigrate people who have led the cases for them, either because they do not look for prosecutors, people who are traditionally lawyers that deal with prosecution. You see, that is why somebody suggested that you go to the various states' ministries of justice and have a look at those who have been prosecuting over the years for the state. They have acquired the skills and are better able to prosecute the matter. Now, when you consult a defense lawyer whose primary function all of his years in practice is defending, and you ask him to prosecute, how do you expect to have a successful conviction instead of using a lawyer who traditionally is a prosecutor? So the problem we have is not because external solicitors are used, but because maybe the prosecuting agencies have always used lawyers who are traditionally defense-minded than prosecutory-minded.
But critics of that have also said that, yeah, external lawyers also might have a problem of conflict of interest.
Right.
Former President Olusegun Obasanjo raised that recently, and he says, and we even saw that in a recent case involving Justice Nguta of the Supreme Court, his trial ongoing before the Federal High Court, where the prosecutor, I think that was Charles Adeogun Phillips, had to step down, and the explanation the government gave was that there was an issue of conflict of interest. And one would ask, was that not taken into consideration before he was even hired to prosecute the case?
But when you heard his version, he said that wasn't the case. That the fact of the matter was that some individuals who were charged along with others, federal government brought an application to have them withdrawn, and he was not comfortable with that. So it's very, very difficult for you to say that.
In situations like that, who determines how a trial should proceed?
Right.
Is it not the prosecutor?
The prosecutor. But you see, the rules of professional conduct is clear about the role of the prosecution, even with respect to conflict of interest. Not just in criminal trial, in every other aspect of litigation. You are likely to represent client A, and tomorrow you are representing client B that is against client A. The rules of professional conduct says if you discover there is going to be a conflict of interest, you decline on your own part without having to continue with the matter. But like I said earlier, if you are going to recruit lawyers who are traditionally prosecutors, then you are not likely going to find this conflict of interest than if you are looking for lawyers who are defense-minded.
All right. Daniel Bwala, thank you so much for your time.
As always. Thank you.
As much more decisions are given against law enforcement agencies, could the heat be turning on the judiciary? Well, some tend to think this might be the case. But Nigeria's Chief Justice Walter Onnoghen says there is no need for such alarm.
You take that as losing steam. If there was steam, then it wouldn't happen without the participation of the judiciary. Okay? Good. So if there is losing of steam, you should not equally relate it only to the judiciary. The fight against corruption has lost no steam. It is not correct. Now, you should know one thing. Two people will always have a quarrel. There may be 300 or 400. All the parties to that quarrel will always have different stories to tell. By the way our system is fashioned and designed and operates, when you go to a court of law, you cannot have a drawn game. There must be a winner and there must be a loser. In our system, the loser has the chance of appealing, okay, to the highest court eventually. So you can't say because the government or any agency has lost a case in the High Court, so he has lost the case, and the fight is losing steam still. You should realize that there is a constitution in place, and under the constitution there is the rule of law. So every system under a constitutional arrangement operated under the rule of law must have these things as checks and balances to protect everyone.
Well, that's Project Justice this week. Do follow us on our various social media platforms at Pro Justice on Twitter, Project Justice on Facebook, and on YouTube. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for staying with us. I am Bwala. We'll see you next week.